Greetings, all. I'm happy to be talking today about a fascinating subject, which is also the topic of your um, document labs this week, which is domestic surveillance, domestic spying. And really, the problem opens with the CIA is legally, in its charter, prohibited from conducting domestic domestic intelligence operations. And the National Security Act that bursts the CIA in 47 specifically charges the Central Intelligence Agency to gather foreign intelligence. So unlike the FBI, the CIA is not supposed to operate inside the United States. And yet, by the early 70s, the CIA is deeply entangled in domestic surveillance. So today we're going to sort of talk about how that happened, the Huston Plan of 1970, and how domestic spying evolved into the modern mass surveillance state. And really, the key question we want to be asking is what happens when national security fears override institutional boundaries? And that will be a massive tension that will um, be hotly debated in terms of overreach. The context in the late 60s in the United States is an interesting one. And this is centered around the crisis at home, really. You have a bunch of things coalescing in the 60s, and there's really no decade in American history from 1960 to 1970 that is more transformative, where that it's things are different at the end of those 10 years than the beginning. It is such a huge leap forward, and the tensions of American society are laid bare. So you have the Vietnam War protests, the war itself. You have Black Power activism, urban uprisings, campus radicalism, and a tenor that runs through all of those is a rising distrust of the government, which you really hadn't seen widespread 10 years before. And President Richard Nixon, especially, he believes that foreign actors, especially the Soviet Union and China, so add the Cold War as the blanket for all of this globally, are directing domestic unrest. So this is a common, and those are not legitimate protesters, right? They're funded by somewhere. You hear this today, you heard this back then. So the intelligence community is asked about the anti-war movement specifically, is it being controlled from abroad? And largely the answer is no. This war is deeply unpopular in the United States for everyday Americans. But the administration is dissatisfied with that conclusion. And that dissatisfaction produces the Huston Plan. So, named after Tom Charles Huston, is a young White House aide tasked with coordinating intelligence agencies to increase domestic intelligence collection. And so in 70, he drafted what became known as the Huston Plan. So what does it propose? So it recommends coordination between the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the National Security Agency, and military intelligence to conduct surreptitious entry, break-ins, expand mail opening programs, increase wiretapping, intensify surveillance of domestic groups, and share intelligence more freely across agencies. And most of this activity either skirts or violated existing legal boundaries. Even the problematic FBI director, infamously J. Edgar Hoover, opposed it, but not on, don't give him too much credit, not on civil liberties grounds, but because it diluted FBI control, right? Suddenly he's not the only one spying domestically, the CIA is part of it as well. So Nixon approves the plan initially. Um, it's later formally rescinded, but many of its elements continued unofficially. And so why does this matter? Well, the fact that it can exist reveals that executive pressure can cause people to bypass the legal constraints like the 47 Charter, um, of the National Security Act, which made this pretty clearly outside the boundaries of the CIA, that is domestic spying, domestic surveillance. Also, we have institutional rivalry inside the intelligence community. So you have the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, military intelligence, all competing to sort of one up and monopolize information. And that will not be great for the United States either. Um, and then we have the really normalization of extraordinary measures in times of crisis, especially like the war footing that the United States is on during Vietnam. And then the CIA's participation blurs those lines between the foreign and domestic intelligence agencies. The domestic operations, again, are illegal and problematic, although prohibited from domestic spying. The CIA conducts several programs targeting Americans. Most famously, Operation Chaos. This begins in 1967. The CIA collects files on over 7,000 Americans, compiled information on more than 300,000 individuals, and targets anti-war activists. And the justification as well, we're finding foreign influence. So that's the tie-in, the sort of thin, tenuous legal thread they're looking for. Is like, well, these are foreign actors, so if their influence follows to domestic shore, then we can pursue this. The result is a massive intelligence database that would later be exposed in Church Committee Rockefeller hearings in 75. The journalist Seymour Hersh, I hope you watch that really fascinating documentary about him, publishes revelations in 74 about CIA domestic spying. And those disclosures helped trigger the Church Committee hearings. And in the hearings, the committee uncovers mail opening programs, assassination plots, illegal surveillance, and of course, Operation Chaos. The outcome under President Ford, strengthened under Carter and Reagan later, creates permanent congressional oversight, intelligence committee oversight, right? So of the intelligence agencies that still exist today. And so for the first time, intelligence agencies have to answer to the legislative branch in Congress through this Congressional Intelligence Oversight committees. But the story doesn't end in 75, right? It mutates with lots of twists and turns. Maybe most prominently 9/11, Congress passes the USA Patriot Act, and the National Security Agency expands dramatically inside the US. And in sort of dramatic revelations, and again, I encourage you to watch and read more about Edward Snowden. His 2013 revelations reveal the bulk metadata collection, warrantless wiretapping, PRISM data harvesting, and really global digital interception. And it's the wired world in the 2000s and beyond that this mass surveillance is allowed or is possible on a scale that's really unimaginable in 1970. So, right, because everything is now in cyberspace, it's much easier to spy on people because you don't have to open their mail. They're sending text messages. You can, AI can listen to phone conversations. But the logic is familiar. National emergency, foreign threat, expanded executive authority, and really an elastic interpretation of legal boundaries. And really, technology makes the difference, makes it possible. Whereas the Houston Plan relies on break-ins and openings, which are challenging and risky, right? They lead to the Watergate scandal, committing a break-in. Modern surveillance, by contrast, relies on fiber optic interception, access to servers, algorithmic data access, and now AI-assisted metadata mapping. So the architecture has changed, but the institutional tension has not. So bringing it together, what does this tell us about intelligence agencies? I think first is mission creep. Foreign intelligence agencies drift towards domestic roles in times of crisis, right? So those eyes and spies that are overseas looking in times of crisis, they look home towards the homeland, and those borders become very murky. Um, Crisis elasticity, war, terrorism, and unrest expand executive authority dramatically. Um, Oversight is reactive, right? So reform follows scandal, not prevention. So it's not really, it's only when an Edward Snowden appears or a Watergate break-in and a church committee, Rockefeller hearings, that suddenly then there's reform. They're not reforming themselves until they're caught red-handed. And the technology really outpaces the law. And so the legal framework lags behind the surveillance capacity in in the digital age. And so the bringing it all together, really the CIA is not supposed to spy on Americans, yet it did and does, under pressure, under secrecy, under claims of national defense. So here really is the problem for us. Is domestic surveillance a deviation from democratic norms, or is it a recurring feature of the modern security state? Right? Is this a feature or a bug? And perhaps more unsettling, are reforms like the church committee structural correctives or just temporary pauses until it can figure out a new way to do that? All right. Well, I hope you're enjoying the files and look forward to checking in again with you next week, and enjoyed looking over your submissions as well. Thanks again, and we will talk soon. Bye.